It's been a while since my last update video, but I've managed to get a few things done on my layout over the last 6 months. These are mostly improvements to the layout with locomotives and rolling stock. Having said that, there are a couple of new models in there. In this video, I'll be giving an overview of these improvements, some of which will be covered in detail in future videos. In my last video, I showed the completed scenery on the Camp D side of the layout. With this in place, the layout's base scenery was complete and ready for details like vehicles and figures. At least, that's what I thought. My original vision had been to have tall timber dwarfing the trains. However, I wasn't used to making trees, and I wasn't sure where to get the supplies to make trees other than evergreen pines. As such, about 90% of the forest on this side were pine trees which, while taller than the trains, didn't have the effect of towering over them. I've now been able to achieve this effect thanks to a bit of luck. At a recent open day at my model railroad club, I met a visitor who was looking to sell his ON30 layout. I purchased the trees he'd made, as well as all his leftover materials. My first step was to transplant the trees I had made. Given that these trees were smaller, I decided to use them to represent new growth in an area that had been logged out and which the railway now passed through. As such, the transplanted trees were put on the left of the bridge. With this done, I planted the new trees amongst what was left of the original scenery. This gave the towering over the trains effect I was after, and also provided a bit more variety. I also replaced a couple of plastic dead trees with wooden ones, and added some deer. The other change that I made to the layout was to the staging tracks used to represent the narrator's standard gauge interchange. Originally, only the outer two tracks were in place, each capable of holding 5 20-foot freight cars. However, one of those two tracks was always occupied by 3 freight cars from the Pebble River Mining Company. As such, I could really only use one of these 2 tracks for Bradford Valley Lumber Company cars. After realising there was space for another track between the existing ones, I added it. This now gives me 2 sidings of 3 freight cars each, and one of 5 freight cars. This is enough to hold all of the BVLC freight cars I need, as well as storing the Pebble River mining ones without having to shuffle the staging sidings. To change these points, I built a point motor out of a servo and some spare Pico parts I had left over from when I built the other staging yard. I already had an Arduino driving a servo for the water tower animation, and so I realised I could use this to drive the servo for the point motor as well. So, this brings me to the next part of my video. The servo for the point motor is driven by the same Arduino that controls the water tower animations. I was originally going to have it activated the same way, via a button on the fascia, but then I had a better idea. A couple of months ago, I built a speedometer boxcar to measure the scale speed of my engines. I'd planned to use an optical coupler chip in conjunction with the onboard Arduino to read the DCC signal on the track. It would then use this to log the locomotive address, throttle setting and speed in scale miles per hour to an SD card reader installed in the boxcar. However, I couldn't get the DCC reading to work, so I went without it. I decided to have another look and found a useful article by Rudy's Model Railway. I've provided a link to this article in the video description below. After this, I found that the DCC sniffer worked without any problems. With this, I was able to get the Arduino under Camp A to listen to the DCC signal on the tracks. When it detects the address of the Pebble River mining locomotive, it will set the points to the middle track. If it's a Bradford Valley Lumber Company address, then the points will be set the other way. The points can also be flipped via a double click of the water tower animation button as a manual override. This breakthrough with the DCC packet sniffer opened the floodgates. As well as the locomotive address, the code can identify other details of the commands being sent, such as what throttle step a locomotive is moving at, and if a function is being activated or deactivated. As such, this allowed me to automate a few other things. All of my locomotives have Soundtrack's Tsunami decoders in them, which include a sound effect for a water stop. After remapping this sound effect to function 5 on each locomotive, I programmed the Arduinos on both sides of the layout to lower the water tower spouts for as long as function 5 is turned on. A light sensor, concealed in the ballast in front of each water tower, ensures that they only lower when there's a locomotive there. On the Camp D side of the layout, I have a count-up timer which simulates the time it takes to load logs onto the train. This was actually my first Arduino project, and it uses a shift register to light up the LEDs as it counts up. With the DCC sniffer in place, I programmed this so that it would be activated by function 8. A block occupancy sensor ensures that it will only activate when there is a train in the siding. To allow this to work, I disabled function 8 on my locomotives and remapped the mute function to function number 9. I've been looking at making speed a part of my operating sessions. To this end, I installed these speedometers in the fascia of the layout. There's one on each side, and they're driven by the same Arduinos that control the animations. I'll be going into the details of how they work in a future video, but the value shown on them is determined by the throttle step that the Arduinos pick up from the DCC sniffer. I also added sound effects to the Camp D side of the layout. A sensor on the lift-out section detects when a train is entering this side of the layout and starts playing an ambient track with sounds of the forest and logging. When the count-up timer is activated, the ambient sound is stopped and the sound effects of logs being loaded are played. The interval between each increment of the count-up timer is picked at random, but it's either 3, 4 or 5 seconds. As such, there are 3 loading sound effects, one for each option. These all play over the same forest noises that I used for the ambient sounds for continuity. After adding the sound effects to the Camp D side of the layout, I decided to add some to the Camp A side as well. Unlike the Camp D sound module, which acts as a slave to the animation controller, this is a standalone module. As well as 2 status LEDs and a test button, this module also includes an on-off switch. Like with the Camp D effects, a sensor on the lift-out section detects when a train is crossing. This ensures that the sounds are playing where the train is. Unlike Camp D, the Camp A side of the layout has no count-up timers or other triggered events that need sound effects. So the effects on this side are all ambient noise, with sounds for the town and the BVLC workshop behind it. When the maintenance of weight train is pulled out of the siding, the Arduino switches the ambient track to one that does not contain workshop sounds. It continues to play the non-workshop track until the maintenance of weight train is back in the siding, and the locomotive shunting it has left. I wanted these sound effects to tell a story. The workmen leave on the maintenance of weight train, then get back to work when they return. The last electronics update I'd like to show actually predates the other ones, aside from the count-up timer. It's an automatic dispatch system run by the base station of my Arduino DCC system. This base station talks to the Arduinos controlling the turntable and the staging that represents logging camps B and C. It works by having the turntable and staging controllers talk back to the base station to report when locomotives have arrived and left those locations. From this, the dispatch system knows which locomotive is assigned to a particular run and when that run is completed. Both scheduled trains and extra trains are dispatched by this system, with the extra trains being randomly generated when needed. Both the schedule and the available cars for extra trains are stored on an SD card, which is read by the base station. It also saves the current state of this operating session to the card, so that it can immediately pick up the next time it's turned on. I've found this to be very useful, as it means that I can just concentrate on running the trains. Speaking of which, I've made some updates to my locomotives and rolling stock too. I'll be covering these in order from least change to the most change. Unlike all of my other locomotives, number 4 still had the original cast plastic wood load in the tender. It looked out of place amongst the real wood fuel loads in my other engines, so I replaced it. The BVLC colours are a graphite smoke box with black paint and white lining, as shown by number 5 here. Number 7 was kit bashed from a Bachmann ON30 Porter, but it still had the black smoke box. I had a batch of graphite paint mixed up from another project, so I repainted it and redid the front number board. It now fits in amongst all the other engines, and I think the white lining suits it. When I originally built number 8, it was designed after one of those 040 dockside tank engines, with the water tank going all the way to the front of the smoke box. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Furthermore, it was built on the chassis from a Bachmann HO scale Prairie, so it runs relatively well. However, in hindsight, I wasn't happy with the design of the front end. So I went on the internet and I found this. This is the type of locomotive that I'd meant to build, so I did some plastic surgery on number 8. After trimming the front of the water tank back, I made a smoke box out of a small length of PVC pipe. I then used brass mesh to add some tread to the front footplate. After the 3D printed smokebox door and headlight bracket arrived from Shapeways, I put it together and painted it. About a year or so ago, I purchased a 3D printed drop center flat car from Shapeways. Upon receiving it, I found it to be much bigger than expected and much wider. Just recently, I took another look at it. Originally, it had overhangs on the center section, which made it too wide for my layout. I was able to trim these overhangs off, and I filed down what was left. After painting it and weathering it, I put it into service on my layout. Now, if you've seen my Camp D scenery video, then you'll have seen this locomotive running in it. This is the Bachmann ON30 Shay, and it's now in a display case. It originally suffered from the cracked gear problems that plagued the early runs of this model, but even when that was fixed, it still had issues. It would derail on curves which didn't cause problems for the other engines, and it did not run reliably. Putting it aside left a gap in my roster, and I needed a new number 2. I've always liked the look of the Class A Climax, so I built this model of one. It runs on 2 self-contained Black Beetle motor bogies, which are controlled by a TSU 1100 decoder. The body is scratch-built, mostly from coffee stirrers and long matchsticks, with some scale strip wood thrown in. The boiler and water tank are made from plastic, along with the frame, and there are some 3D printed details that I had done via Shapeways. So, that's what I've done on my layout over the last 6 months. I'll be making some more videos covering the making of number 2, the speedometers, and the speedo boxcar, and some more detail on the layout automation. Cheers for now.